Chapter 1. I was standing at the gate of Potter Correctional Institution, staring at him when he was killed. Waiting to be buzzed into the pedestrian sally port, my view slightly impaired by chain-link fence and razor wire, I was gazing into the back of a trash truck. The hot July sun reflected off the razors like the mirrored shades of a redneck police chief. Waves of heat dancing through circles of steel, and the air was thick and difficult to breathe. The clear, blue, cloudless sky offered no shelter from the sun's assault, nor any promise of rain for the parched planet beneath my feet. I had no idea what I was witnessing at the time. A murder? An accident? A suicide? At first, all I could see was a young correctional officer with a bad complexion and wide hips, standing on the back of a white Ford flatbed pickup truck, thrusting a long metal rod into the trash bags piled on it. His hips were so wide and strangely shaped, it looked like he was wearing football pants with full pads. His face and his light brown uniform was soaked through. It wasn't the young officer's odd appearance, but the enthusiasm with which he executed his task that caught my attention. I was awestruck by the violent blows each bag received. Obviously, there were more effective and efficient ways to search the trash before it was removed from the institution, which meant the manner in which he was doing it was a warning to all the inmates looking on, as much as it was any kind of actual hunt for an inmate trying to escape. Like a prehistoric sign language or an antiquated form of Morse code, every violent stab was a character of communication. Taken together, they sent out a concise message for all who had the eyes to see. Attempting to escape PCI in the back of a trash truck was a bad idea. Even though inmates were sometimes treated like trash, and at times acted like trash, they were not going to escape by pretending to be trash. What a strange, surreal little claustrophobic world I was entering. It wasn't that I didn't understand the need for a certain type of security. I did. And I knew an officer had to check every vehicle and everything in those vehicles before they left the institution. Recalling just one of the many real-life horror stories of escaped inmates recited during my recent new employee orientation was more than enough to convince me of that. But I couldn't help but believe that the excessiveness expressed in this particular brutal method of searching the trash contributed to the violent and essentially inhumane environment of this secret and closed society. Preparing to stab the final bag in the center of the truck, the officer stumbled over the outer ones and hovered above it. Raising the weapon above his head, he brought it down with a force far more incredible than even the others had been. But this time, when the rod entered the bag, there was a deep thump, followed by the sound similar to that of twigs caught in a lawnmower. This time the metal implement did not return when the officer attempted to retract it. He then took another stance and yanked even harder. On his third attempt in that position, he pulled it free, ripping open the bag as he did. It was dripping with blood. At first, I thought he had stabbed a can of chocolate syrup from food services or an old oil can from maintenance, but his reaction quickly convinced me otherwise. The young officer lost all color and stumbled backward, dropping his blunt spear, and reached for his radio only to discover that it wasn't there, something that served to make him only more frantic. I waved to the officer in the control room, who immediately buzzed me in. As I ran in, the officer on the flatbed began yelling, "Oh God! Chaplain! Chaplain! Chaplain, get out here now! Call for help! Get—" His voice, which had been weak and tight and frightened, turned to pure high-pitched hysteria. "Oh God! Oh God! What the— Oh shit! There's a body in—" With that, he passed out. I rushed over to the second gate that led into the vehicle sally port, and before I reached it, the control room had already buzzed it open. I ran straight through the gate, pausing on the other side only long enough to close it behind me. I ran straight through the gate, pausing on the other side only long enough to close it behind me. Heart hammering in my chest, thoughts a blur of indistinguishable images. Climbing up onto the back of the truck, I saw that the officer had landed on a bag of papers that had cushioned his fall. I crouched beside him, the sweat from my face dropping onto his. I could tell he was beginning to come around. My eyes moved down his body. The name tag on his shirt read, "Shut." His feet, covered in blood now, were still touching the last bag he had stabbed. It looked as if the entire bed of the truck, once white, was now crimson. "Look at me," I said when he first opened his eyes. "Shut? Don't look down. Look right at me." He immediately looked down and began backpedaling away from the blood, like a sand crab avoiding an approaching tide. Blood splattered everywhere. On the bags. On him. On me. And I wondered if the red rain falling on us might contain an infection. HIV or hepatitis B. Something far more likely in here than on the street. In his clumsy attempt to escape, the officer knocked me back into the bag with the body in it. As I fell, it enveloped me, and I felt warm, sticky liquid on the back of my neck and soaking through my clothes. Lurching forward, I pivoted slightly, a morbid part of me wanting to see. Lifeless black eyes staring blankly, black head hanging unnaturally. I slid forward, trying to move away. When I sat up, I noticed that one of the nurses, a tall young woman with blonde hair, had entered the sally port with us. Shut was already off the truck, moving frantically toward the gate where I had entered. The officer in the control room had the wits about her not to let him through. I quickly jumped off the truck and had to hold onto its side, as inside me all the blood seemed to drain from my head. Within seconds, officers began pouring into the sally port from the other gates. 2 immediately went over to check on Shut. Another came to check on me. All of them straining to see into the back of the truck, which had taken on a surreal, slightly horrific quality. "Chaplain, you okay?" Captain Skipper asked. "Fine," I lied, nodding. "But let's get Shut to medical. He's really shaken up, and he's got blood all over him. We both need to get cleaned up." "They're on the way," he said, and looked back at the truck. "Damnation, how can there be so much blood?" "Heart must have still been pumping," I said. "How did everyone respond so fast?" "Tower," he said as if it were obvious. I looked 50 feet up at the tower to see the officer leaning out of the window, observing everything below, radio still in her hand. When I looked back down, I saw that the nurse had her arm around the distraught officer, talking to him reassuringly. I walked over to them. "Chaplain, can you help me here for a minute?" the nurse asked. A delicate, pale, blue-eyed beauty, she wore more makeup than she needed. "Sure," I said, glancing at her name tag. "Strickland," she said, trying but unable to remove the distressed look from her late-20s face. "John Jordan." "I need to check on the inmate in the truck, John. Can you stay with him?" "Sure," I said. She turned to leave, but then turned back to Shut and said, "I'm so sorry, but it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay." She then ran over to the truck and bravely climbed onto the back. Snapping on latex gloves, she carefully but quickly made her way to the bag with the body in it. Crouching down to check the inmate, nearly disappearing behind the bags as she did, she moved with the surety and confidence of a seasoned ER nurse. Moments later, the colonel and other medical personnel began to arrive.